Samuel Morrison walked through his empty house as the sun went down. His footsteps made loud sounds on the wooden floors. The big house felt cold and quiet. Too quiet. He stopped at the window and looked out at his land. Miles and miles of tobacco. Fields stretched as far as he could see. This was his empire. This was everything he had worked for his whole life. But what good was it now? Samuel was 53 years old. His hair had turned gray early, and his face showed deep lines from worry and sadness. He had been married 3 times. All 3 of his wives were dead now. Sarah died when she was only 22, just 2 days after giving birth to their first son. The baby died 3 days later. Samuel buried them both in the family cemetery behind the house. His second wife, Elizabeth, lasted longer. She gave him 2 children, but the fever took all 3 of them in one terrible winter. Samuel remembered coming home from town to find them all still and cold in their beds. The doctor said there was nothing anyone could do. The sickness just came and took them away. Margaret was his 3rd wife. She was older and stronger than the others. Samuel thought maybe this time would be different. Margaret gave birth to 4 babies over 6 years, but none of them lived to see their first birthday. One by one, Samuel watched them get sick and die. Margaret grew sadder with each loss. She stopped talking and stopped eating. One morning, Samuel found her in the garden. She had taken her own life rather than face another day without her children. Now Samuel lived alone in the big house with 37 slaves to work his land. The house had 12 rooms, but Samuel only used 3 of them. The nursery stayed locked. He could not bear to look at the empty cribs and tiny clothes that would never be worn again. The other plantation owners in the county whispered about Samuel when they thought he could not hear. Some said he was cursed. Others said God was punishing him for some terrible sin. A few of the religious ones said he should pray more and give more money to the church, but Samuel had prayed until his knees bled. He had given so much money to the church that the preacher bought a new house. Nothing worked. Nothing brought his children back. Samuel walked to his study and poured himself a glass of whiskey. He did this every night now. The alcohol helped numb the pain, at least for a while. He sat in his big leather chair and stared at the paintings on the wall. There was Sarah, young and beautiful in her wedding dress. There was Elizabeth holding their first baby, both of them smiling. There was Margaret in the garden before sadness took her away. All dead, all gone. Samuel drank his whiskey and thought about what would happen when he died. He had no children to leave his land to, no sons to carry on the Morrison name. The plantation would go to his nephew James, who lived in Charleston and had never worked a day in the tobacco fields. James would probably sell the land to strangers. Everything Samuel had built would be lost. The thought made Samuel sick to his stomach. His father had started this plantation with just 50 acres and 2 slaves. Samuel had grown it into one of the biggest tobacco farms in Virginia. He employed dozens of workers and made enough money to live like a king. But what was the point if it would all disappear when he died? Samuel finished his whiskey and poured another glass. Outside, he could hear the slaves finishing their work for the day. They were singing as they walked back to their cabins. The sound made Samuel feel even more alone. They had families. They had children. Some of the slave women had given birth to 8 or 9 healthy babies. How was it possible that they could have so many children while his wives could barely keep one alive? It was not fair. Samuel had money and a big house and good food. The slaves lived in tiny cabins and ate whatever scraps they could find. But their children lived and grew strong while his babies died. Samuel had thought about marrying again. There were several widows in Richmond who would be happy to become Mrs. Morrison. But he was too afraid. What if the same thing happened again? What if another wife died in childbirth? What if more babies came into the world only to leave it before they could even speak their first words? Samuel could not bear to go through that pain again. The clock on the wall chimed 9 times. Samuel knew he should eat dinner, but he had no appetite. Food tasted like ash in his mouth these days. He ate only because he had to, not because he wanted to. A soft knock came at the study door. Samuel looked up to see Miriam standing in the doorway. She was holding a tray with his dinner on it. Miriam was 26 years old and had worked in the big house since she was a child. She was smart and quiet and never caused any trouble. The other slaves respected her, and even Samuel had to admit she was more intelligent than most of the white women he knew. Miriam set the tray down on Samuel's desk without saying a word. She had learned that he did not like to talk during dinner. She started to leave, but Samuel called her back. "Miriam, wait." She turned around and looked at him with her dark eyes. Samuel stared at her for a long moment. She was not beautiful in the way his wives had been beautiful, but there was something about her that made Samuel feel calm. She never seemed afraid of him, even though he owned her. She looked at him like he was just a man, not a master. "Do you ever think about having children?" Samuel asked. Miriam looked surprised by the question. "Yes, sir. I think about it sometimes." "Do you think you would be a good mother?" "I hope so, sir. I help take care of the children in the quarters. I like children very much." Samuel nodded and waved her away. Miriam left quietly, closing the door behind her. Samuel sat alone with his dinner getting cold and his whiskey getting warm. He thought about what Miriam had said. She would probably be a good mother. She was gentle with the slave children and always made sure they had enough to eat. If only he could find a way to have a child of his own. If only there was someone who could give him the son he needed so desperately. Someone who would not die in childbirth. Someone whose baby would live to grow up and inherit the plantation. Samuel finished his whiskey and stumbled up to his bedroom. Tomorrow would be another empty day in his empty house. But tonight, for the first time in years, he had an idea forming in his mind. It was a crazy idea, a dangerous idea, but it might be his only hope. The question was whether he was brave enough to try it. Samuel could not sleep that night. He lay in his big bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about the strange idea that had come to him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the faces of his dead wives and children. But he also saw Miriam's calm face and heard her voice saying she would like to have children someday. The idea was impossible. It was against the law. It was against everything he had been taught since he was a boy. White men did not make such arrangements with their slaves. At least they did not talk about it if they did. But Samuel was desperate. He had tried everything else. 3 marriages had failed. 7 babies had died. He was running out of time and running out of hope. The next morning, Samuel ate his breakfast in silence while Miriam served him. She moved quietly around the dining room, pouring his coffee and bringing him fresh bread from the kitchen. Samuel watched her carefully. She was not like the other slave women on the plantation. Miriam could read a little, which was unusual. She had learned by watching Samuel's wives when they read books or wrote letters. She was also good with numbers and helped keep track of supplies for the big house. Most importantly, Miriam was healthy and strong. She had never been sick a day in her life, as far as Samuel knew. She came from good stock. Her mother had lived to be nearly 60 before she died, and she had given birth to 6 children who all survived to adulthood. Maybe that was what Samuel needed. Maybe his wives had been too delicate, too refined. Maybe he needed someone with stronger blood, someone whose body was made for having babies and keeping them alive. Samuel spent the day riding around his plantation, checking on the tobacco crops and talking to his overseer about the harvest. But his mind was not on business. He kept thinking about Miriam and the crazy plan that was growing in his head. That evening, Samuel went to his study as usual. He poured himself a drink and waited. Soon, Miriam came with his dinner tray. Samuel had been practicing what he would say all day, but when the moment came, the words got stuck in his throat. "Your dinner, sir," Miriam said, setting the tray down. "Thank you," Samuel replied. His voice sounded strange, even to himself. Miriam started to leave, but Samuel called her back again. "Miriam, I want to ask you something important." She turned around and waited. Samuel could see that she was curious but not afraid. That was good. He needed her to stay calm for what he was about to say. "You know I have no children," Samuel began. "No heirs to inherit this plantation." Yes, sir. And you know that when I die, everything will go to my nephew in Charleston. Yes, sir. Samuel took a deep breath. What if I told you there was a way to change that? A way for you to have your own land someday? Miriam's eyes widened slightly, but she did not speak. Samuel stood up and walked to the window. He could not look at her while he said the words. I need a son, Miriam. Someone to carry on my name and inherit this plantation. I have tried with 3 wives, and God has taken them all away from me. He turned around to face her. I will give you my land if you give me a son. The words hung in the air between them like smoke from a fire. Samuel waited for Miriam to run, screaming from the room. He waited for her to call him crazy or evil or worse, but Miriam did not run. She did not scream. She stood very still and looked at him with those dark eyes that never seemed afraid of anything. What exactly are you asking me to do, sir? She said quietly. Samuel was surprised by her calmness. He had expected shock or horror, not practical questions. I am asking you to bear me a child, he said. A son, if God is willing. In return, I will give you your freedom and a portion of this land. The child will inherit the rest when he comes of age. Miriam was quiet for a long time. Samuel could hear his heart beating in his chest. Finally, she spoke. This is against the law in Virginia, sir. A white man cannot marry a slave woman. I am not talking about marriage, Samuel said. I am talking about an arrangement, a business agreement. What would happen to me if people found out? Samuel had thought about this too. We would have, to be very careful, very secret. But I have lawyers who could draw up papers to protect you, to make sure you get what I promise. Miriam nodded slowly. And what about the child? What would happen to him? He would be my son in every way that matters. He would inherit this plantation and everything that comes with it. He would never be a slave. Even though his mother is a slave? His mother would not be a slave anymore, Samuel said. I would free you before the child is born. Miriam walked to the window and looked out at the fields where she had worked since she was a little girl. Samuel watched her think. He could almost see her mind working, considering all the possibilities and dangers. Why me? She asked finally. Samuel had asked himself the same question many times. Because you are smart and strong. Because your family lives long and has healthy children. Because I trust you more than anyone else in this house. And because I am already here, where you can watch me and control me. Samuel felt his face get hot. She was right, of course. It would be easier with Miriam than with anyone else, but that was not the only reason. Yes, he admitted. That too. Miriam turned back to face him. I need time to think about this, sir. This is not a small thing you are asking. Of course. Take all the time you need. May I ask you a question, sir? Yes. What makes you think this time will be different? What makes you think I can give you a living child when your wives could not? Samuel had wondered about this too. He had no proof that Miriam would be any more successful than Sarah or Elizabeth or Margaret, but he had to believe there was a reason why God had taken his wives and children away. Maybe it was to lead him to this moment, to this woman who might finally give him what he needed. I do not know if it will be different, Samuel said honestly, but I have to try. I cannot give up hope. Miriam nodded. I understand, sir. I will think about what you have said. She picked up the dinner tray and left the room. Samuel poured himself another drink and sat down heavily in his chair. He had done it. He had said the words out loud. There was no taking them back now. Samuel did not know what Miriam would decide. The smart thing would be for her to say no. The safe thing would be to pretend this conversation had never happened. But Samuel hoped she would see the opportunity in his offer. Freedom was something no slave ever expected to have. Land ownership was even more impossible. But Samuel was offering both. All she had to do was give him one healthy son. Samuel finished his drink and went to bed. For the first time in months, he fell asleep quickly. He dreamed of a little boy running through the tobacco fields, laughing, and calling him Papa. In his dream, the boy had Miriam's dark eyes and Samuel's stubborn chin. When Samuel woke up the next morning, he felt something he had not felt in years. He felt hope. For 3 days, Miriam said nothing about Samuel's strange offer. She brought his meals and cleaned his rooms just like always. But Samuel could see her thinking. He watched her face when she thought he was not looking. He saw the way she stared, out the windows at the fields and the slave cabins. Samuel tried to act normal, but it was hard. Every time Miriam came into a room, his heart started beating faster. He wanted to ask her what she was thinking, but he forced himself to wait. This had to be her choice. On the 4th day, Miriam did something different. Instead of leaving right after serving breakfast, she stayed in the dining room and cleaned the same table 3 times. "Sir," she said finally, "may I speak with you about your offer?" Samuel's coffee cup rattled when he set it down. "Of course. I have been thinking very carefully about what you said. I have some questions. Ask me anything." Miriam sat down in the chair across from him. Samuel was surprised. Slaves never sat at the dining table with their masters. But he did not tell her to stand up. "First, I want to know about the papers you mentioned." "What kind of papers?" Samuel had spent the last 3 days thinking about this too. "I would have my lawyer draw up a contract. It would say that you are free and that you own a part of this land. It would also say that any children you have belong to you, not to me as their master. Would this contract be legal? Could it be changed later?" "It would be as legal as I can make it, but you are right to worry. Virginia law does not like to give land to freed slaves, and white men who have children with slave women can face trouble." Miriam nodded. "That brings me to my second question. What happens if people find out about our arrangement? What happens to me and the child?" Samuel had thought about this too, but he did not have a good answer. "We would have to be very careful, very secret. Most people would not understand. And if your nephew finds out, he expects to inherit this plantation. He will not be happy to learn that a slave woman and her child might get it instead." This was Samuel's biggest worry. James Morrison was a greedy man who had been counting on inheriting the plantation for years. If he found out about Samuel's plan, he would do everything possible to stop it. "James lives in Charleston," Samuel said. "He only visits once or twice a year. By the time he learns about the child, it will be too late to stop anything." "What about the other plantation owners? What about the people in town?" Samuel sighed. "Some of them will be angry. They might try to cause trouble for us. But I have money and influence. I can protect you and the child." Miriam was quiet for a moment. Then she asked the question Samuel had been dreading. "What if the child dies like your other children did? What happens to me then?" Samuel felt sick thinking about it. "I do not know. I pray that will not happen. But if it does, you would still have your freedom and your land. That would not change. And what if I cannot have children at all? Some women cannot, you know. Then we would have tried our best. You would still be free." Miriam stood up and walked to the window. "You are asking me to risk everything, sir. If this goes wrong, I could end up dead. Slave women who get too close to their masters sometimes disappear." Samuel knew this was true. He had heard stories of slave women who were killed by jealous wives or angry relatives, but he would not let that happen to Miriam. "I give you my word that I will protect you," he said. "Your word as a gentleman? My word as a man who needs your help." Miriam turned back to face him. "I have more questions." "Go ahead." "If I agree to this, where would I live? I cannot stay in the slave cabins if I am supposed to be free." Samuel had thought about this too. "There is a small cabin near the main house that used to be the overseer's home. You could live there. It has 2 rooms and a fireplace. It would be comfortable for you and a child. And what would people think about me living there? We would tell them you are my housekeeper, that you have been freed for your good service, and that I am letting you stay on the plantation to help manage the house." Miriam nodded. "That might work. What about work? What would I do all day?" "You would still help in the house, but as a paid worker, not a slave. You could also learn to read and write better. A landowner needs to know these things." "You would teach me?" "Yes, if you want to learn." Miriam walked around the room, thinking. Samuel watched her and tried to guess what she was going to say. She was being very practical about everything, which gave him hope. If she was just going to say no, she would not be asking so many detailed questions. "I have one more question," Miriam said. "The most important one." "What is it?" "Why should I trust you?" "You own me. You could promise me anything and then change your mind later. What guarantee do I have that you will keep your word?" Samuel stood up and went to his desk. He pulled out a piece of paper and a pen. "I will write it down right now," he said. "I will put in writing that you are free and that you will inherit 50 acres of the best land on this plantation. I will sign it and date it. Tomorrow I will take it to my lawyer and have him make it official." 50 acres? Is that not enough? Miriam thought for a moment. "I want 100 acres, and I want it to be the land by the river, where the soil is best for growing vegetables." Samuel was surprised by her boldness, but he was also impressed. She was not just accepting whatever he offered. She was negotiating like a smart businesswoman. 100 acres is a lot of land," he said. "You are asking me to do a lot." Samuel looked at the map of his plantation that hung on the wall. He owned over 2,000 acres. 100 acres was not much compared to that. "All right, 100 acres by the river, and I want the cabin to be fixed up before I move into it. New roof, new floor, glass in the windows." "Agreed. And I want $50 a year for working as your housekeeper." $50? "Free workers get paid, sir. If I am truly free, I should be paid for my work." Samuel had never thought about paying Miriam, but she was right. Free people did not work without wages. $25, he said. 40. 35. Done. Samuel wrote everything down on the paper. When he finished, he handed it to Miriam. She read it carefully, moving her finger under each word. "This says that if I bear you a living son, I get freedom, 100 acres of land, and $35 a year for housekeeping work." "That is right." "And what if the child is a girl?" Samuel had not thought about this. He needed a son to carry on his name, but he could not control whether the baby was a boy or girl. "A daughter would still inherit," he said, "and you would still get everything I promised." Miriam folded the paper and put it in her pocket. "I need one more day to think." "Of course." She started to leave, then turned back. "Sir, may I ask why? You think I can succeed where your wives failed?" Samuel had asked himself this question many times. "My wives were delicate ladies. They were not strong enough for childbearing. You are different. You come from strong women who have many healthy children. You think it is about breeding like horses or cattle." Samuel felt his face get red. "I did not mean it that way." "But that is what you think, is it not? That slave women are better at making babies?" Samuel did not know how to answer. He had never thought about it so directly before. "I think you are a strong woman who might be able to give me what I need most," he said finally. Miriam nodded. "At least you are honest." She left the room and Samuel sat down heavily in his chair. The negotiation had been harder than he expected. Miriam was tougher and smarter than he had realized, but that was probably good. He needed someone strong for what lay ahead. Tomorrow he would know her answer. The next morning, Miriam came to Samuel's study before breakfast. She was holding the paper he had written the day before. "I have made my decision, sir," she said. Samuel's heart was beating so fast he thought it might burst. "And?" "I will accept your offer." Samuel felt dizzy with relief. "You will?" "Yes, but I want to add one more thing to our agreement." "What is that?" "If something happens to you before the child grows up, I want protection for him. Your nephew or someone else might try to take away his inheritance." Samuel nodded. This was smart thinking. "I will make sure the legal papers protect the child even after I die. My lawyer can set up a trust." "Good." Miriam handed him the paper. "Then we have a deal." Samuel took the paper with shaking hands. After all these years of grief and loneliness, he finally had hope again. "When do we start?" he asked. "First, you need to fix up the cabin like you promised. I will not live in a place with holes in the roof. I will have men working on it today. and you need to go to your lawyer and make the papers official. I will ride to Richmond this afternoon." Miriam looked at him seriously. "Sir, once we begin this arrangement, there is no going back. Are you sure this is what you want?" Samuel thought about his empty house and his empty life. He thought about his nephew James waiting to inherit everything Samuel had worked for. He thought about dying alone with no one to remember his name. "I am sure," he said. "Then I will move to the cabin when it is ready." Samuel spent the next week making preparations. He hired workers to fix the roof and floor of the small cabin. He bought glass for the windows and new furniture for the rooms. He even had them build a small garden behind the cabin where Miriam could grow vegetables. The trip to Richmond was harder. Samuel had to be very careful about what he told his lawyer. He could not say directly that he planned to have a child with a slave woman. Instead, he talked about wanting to free Miriam for her good service and give her some land as a reward. The lawyer, Mr. Peterson, was suspicious. "It is very unusual to give land to a freed slave, Mr. Morrison. Are you sure about this?" "I am sure. Miriam has served my family faithfully for many years. I want to make sure she is taken care of. People will talk, you know. They will wonder why you are being so generous. Let them talk. It is my land to give away." Mr. Peterson drew up the papers, but Samuel could see he was not happy about it. Samuel did not care. He paid the lawyer's fee and rode home with the official documents in his saddlebag. When the cabin was ready, Miriam moved her few belongings from the slave quarters. Samuel watched from his window as she arranged her new home. She had a real bed now instead of a straw mattress on the floor. She had a table and chairs and a chest for her clothes. It was not much compared to the big house, but it was more than any slave could ever hope to have. The other slaves were curious about Miriam's new situation. Samuel told them that she had been freed for her good service and was now working as his paid housekeeper. Some of them seemed to believe this story. Others looked suspicious but said nothing. On Miriam's first night in the cabin, Samuel came to visit her. He knocked on the door like a gentleman calling on a lady. Miriam invited him in and served him tea. "How do you like your new home?" Samuel asked. "It is very nice. Thank you." They sat quietly for a while, drinking tea and looking at each other. Samuel realized he did not know how to begin this strange relationship. With his wives, there had been courtship and marriage ceremonies. This was different. "I want you to know that I will treat you with respect," Samuel said finally. "This may not be a marriage, but I will not force myself on you or hurt you." Miriam nodded. "I appreciate that, sir. You do not have to call me sir anymore. We are partners now. What should I call you?" "Samuel. My name is Samuel." "All right, Samuel." It felt strange to hear his first name from her lips. No slave had ever called him by his name before. "There is something else," Samuel said. "I want to teach you to read and write better. A landowner needs these skills. I would like that very much." So they began a routine. 3 times a week, Samuel came to Miriam's cabin in the evening. Sometimes they would read together from books in Samuel's library. Sometimes Samuel would teach Miriam arithmetic so she could manage money and keep accounts. And sometimes they would just talk about their hopes for the future. Samuel found that he enjoyed these conversations more than he had expected. Miriam was intelligent and curious about the world beyond the plantation. She asked questions about politics and business that his wives had never cared about. She had opinions and ideas that surprised him. Slowly, carefully, they became more than teacher and student. Samuel had been lonely for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to have someone to talk to. Miriam had never been treated as an equal by any white person. They were both discovering something new. 2 months after Miriam moved to the cabin, she told Samuel she was carrying his child. "Are you sure?" Samuel asked. His voice shook with excitement and fear. "I am sure. I have missed my monthly time twice. Now?" Samuel felt tears come to his eyes. After all the losses, after all the grief, he was going to be a father again. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Scared," Miriam admitted, "but hopeful too." Samuel took her hands in his. "I will take care of you. I will make sure you have the best food and the best care. Nothing will happen to you or the baby. What if people notice? We will be careful. You can wear loose dresses to hide your condition. When the time comes, we will say the baby belongs to one of the field hands. And after the baby is born, then we will figure out how to tell people the truth. The child will be my heir, but we will have to be smart about how we reveal that. Miriam squeezed his hands. Samuel, I want you to know something. This started as an arrangement between us, a business deal. But I care about you now. I care about our child. Samuel felt his heart swell with an emotion he had not felt since his first wife died. I care about you too, Miriam. More than I expected, too. They sat together in the small cabin, holding hands and thinking about the baby that was growing inside Miriam. Samuel had not felt this happy in years, but he also knew that the hardest part was still ahead of them. Having the baby was just the beginning. They would have to keep their secret safe from Samuel's neighbors, from his nephew James, and from anyone else who might try to hurt them. They would have to raise a child who belonged to two different worlds, the world of the slave and the world of the master. But for now, Samuel was content to sit with Miriam and dream about their son, because somehow he knew it would be a son. He could feel it in his bones. After all these years of loss and grief, God was finally going to give him the heir he needed. The Morrison name would live on. The plantation would have someone to inherit it, and Samuel would not die alone and forgotten. All he had to do was keep Miriam and the baby safe until the child was old enough to claim his birthright. As Miriam's pregnancy progressed, Samuel became more nervous than he had ever been in his life. Every morning he rushed to her cabin to make sure she was well. Every evening, he brought her special foods that he thought would keep her and the baby healthy. You are going to make yourself sick with worry, Miriam told him one day. She was 6 months pregnant now, and her belly was growing round under her loose dresses. I cannot help it, Samuel said. Every time I lost a child before, it happened so suddenly. One day everything was fine, and the next day, Miriam put her hand on his arm. I am not your other wives, Samuel. I am strong. My mother had 6 children and never lost one. My grandmother had 9 children. This baby will live. Samuel wanted to believe her, but fear lived deep in his heart. He had been disappointed too many times before. To keep his mind busy, Samuel threw himself into preparing for the birth. He rode to Richmond and found the best doctor in the city. Dr. Williams was an older man who had delivered hundreds of babies. Samuel paid him a large sum of money to come to the plantation when the time arrived. Samuel also made sure Miriam had everything she needed. He bought soft cloth for baby clothes and a wooden cradle made by the finest carpenter in town. He ordered special foods from Richmond and made sure Miriam's cabin was always warm and comfortable. The other slaves began to notice that something was different. They saw Samuel visiting Miriam's cabin every day. They saw the special treatment she was getting. Some of them whispered among themselves, but no one dared ask questions directly. Samuel's overseer, Mr. Jenkins, was more bold. Sir, the slaves are talking about you and that woman Miriam, he said one day. What are they saying? They think you have taken her as your bedwoman. They wonder why she gets to live in the cabin instead of working in the fields. Samuel felt his face get hot. Miriam is my housekeeper. She has been freed for her good service. What I do with my own property is my business. Yes, sir, but people in town are starting to talk too. They wonder why you freed her and gave her a cabin. Let them talk. I do not care what people think. But Samuel did care, and he was worried. If too many people became suspicious, they might cause trouble for Miriam and the baby. Samuel decided to be more careful. He stopped visiting Miriam's cabin during the day when people might see him. Instead, he waited until after dark to check on her. He also told people in town that Miriam was helping him organize his late wife's belongings. This gave her a reason to be in the big house during the day. As winter turned to spring, Miriam grew larger and more uncomfortable. Samuel could see that she was tired and sometimes in pain, but she never complained. She continued to help in the big house and tend her small garden. You should rest more, Samuel told her. The baby needs you to be strong. I feel better when I keep busy, Miriam replied. Sitting around thinking about the birth just makes me nervous. Samuel understood this feeling. He was nervous too. As the due date approached, he could barely eat or sleep. He jumped at every sound, thinking it might be Miriam calling for help. On a warm April morning, Samuel's fears became reality. He was eating breakfast when Miriam appeared in the doorway of the dining room. Her face was pale and she was holding her belly. Samuel, I think it is time. Samuel dropped his coffee cup and it shattered on the floor. Are you sure? The pains started an hour ago. They are getting stronger. Samuel ran to his horse and rode as fast as he could to Dr. Williams' house in Richmond. The doctor was with another patient, but Samuel's money convinced him to come immediately. They rode back to the plantation together, Samuel's heart pounding with every step. When they arrived, they found Miriam in her cabin, walking back and forth and breathing heavily. Good morning, young lady, Dr. Williams said calmly. Let us see how you are doing. Samuel waited outside while the doctor examined Miriam. Every minute felt like an hour. He thought about Sarah dying in childbirth. He thought about Elizabeth and the babies who had lived only days or weeks. Finally, Dr. Williams came outside. She is doing well, Mr. Morrison. The baby should arrive this evening or tonight. First babies sometimes take their time. Is she in danger? She is young and healthy. I see no reason for concern. But Samuel was concerned anyway. He paced around the cabin like a caged animal. He sent servants to bring anything the doctor might need. He prayed to God to let this baby live. As the sun went down, Miriam's pains got stronger. Samuel could hear her crying out from inside the cabin. The sound made him feel sick with worry. This is normal, Dr. Williams told him. Bringing a child into the world is hard work. Samuel had heard his wives make the same sounds, and 2 of them had died. He could not believe this was normal until he saw a living baby in his arms. Just after midnight, Samuel heard a new sound from inside the cabin. It was the sound he had been praying for, the strong, healthy cry of a newborn baby. Dr. Williams came outside with a smile on his face. Congratulations, Mr. Morrison. You have a son. Samuel felt his knees go weak. A son? He is alive? Very much alive. And very loud. Come and meet him. Samuel followed the doctor into the cabin. Miriam was lying on the bed, tired but smiling. In her arms was a tiny baby wrapped in a soft blanket. Would you like to hold your son? Miriam asked. Samuel reached out with shaking hands and took the baby. He was so small and perfect. He had a full head of dark hair and tiny fingers that gripped Samuel's thumb. Most importantly, he was breathing and crying and very much alive. What will you name him? Dr. Williams asked. Samuel looked at Miriam. They had talked about names during the pregnancy. Thomas, Miriam said. His name is Thomas Morrison. Samuel held his son close to his chest and felt tears running down his face. After all the losses, after all the grief, he finally had a living child. Thomas was small and fragile, but his cries were strong and his grip was firm. Dr. Williams stayed for 2 more days to make sure Miriam and the baby were healthy. Both mother and child did well. Thomas nursed eagerly and slept peacefully. Miriam recovered quickly from the birth. When the doctor left, Samuel sat alone with Miriam and Thomas in the quiet cabin. The baby was sleeping in the wooden cradle, and Miriam was resting in bed. You did it, Samuel said quietly. You gave me a living son. We did it, Miriam corrected. This is our son, Samuel, not just yours. Samuel looked at the sleeping baby and felt his heart swell with love and hope. Our son, Thomas Morrison. He will inherit this plantation someday. He will have to be strong, Miriam said. People will not accept him easily. A child with a white father and a black mother will face many challenges. Samuel knew this was true. Thomas would belong to 2 worlds but fit completely into neither. But Samuel was determined to protect his son and give him every advantage possible. We will teach him to be proud of who he is, Samuel said. We will make sure he knows his worth. And we will love him, Miriam added, no matter what anyone else thinks. Samuel reached over and took Miriam's hand. Thank you. You have given me the greatest gift possible. Miriam squeezed his hand. You have given me freedom and a future for my son. We are even. Samuel looked around the small cabin that had become so important to him. Just a year ago, he had been alone and hopeless. Now he had a son and a woman who cared about him. His life had meaning again. But Samuel also knew that their troubles were just beginning. Soon people would start asking questions about the baby. His nephew James would eventually visit and see Thomas. Samuel would have to find a way to protect his new family while also preparing Thomas to inherit the plantation. For now, though, Samuel was content to sit in the quiet cabin and watch his son sleep. Thomas Morrison was alive and healthy. The Morrison name would continue. And Samuel was no longer alone in the world. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything Samuel had dreamed of for so long. For 2 years, Samuel lived in happiness he had not known was possible. Thomas grew into a healthy, curious toddler who filled the plantation with laughter. The little boy had Samuel's green eyes and stubborn chin, but Miriam's quick mind and gentle nature. Samuel spent every free moment with his son. He carried Thomas around the plantation on his shoulders, showing him the tobacco fields and explaining how everything worked. Thomas was too young to understand, but Samuel loved talking to him anyway. Someday all of this will be yours, Samuel would tell Thomas as they walked through the fields. You will be the master of Morrison Plantation. Miriam worried that Samuel was being too open about his feelings for Thomas. People will notice how much attention you give him, she warned. They will start asking questions. Let them ask, Samuel replied. I have waited my whole life for this child. I will not hide my joy. But Miriam was right to worry. The slaves on the plantation already whispered about the special treatment Thomas received. They saw how Samuel's face lit up when the little boy came running to him. They noticed that Thomas ate better food and wore finer clothes than any slave child should have. Samuel told people that Thomas was the son of one of his field hands, and that he was being kind to the boy because his mother had died. But the story did not convince everyone. Thomas looked too much like Samuel, and Samuel acted too much like a proud father. Samuel's overseer, Mr. Jenkins, was especially suspicious. That boy is getting mighty uppity for a slave child, he said one day. He talks back to the other slaves, and acts like he owns the place. He is just spirited, Samuel replied. Some children are born leaders. A slave child should not think he is a leader of anything. Samuel felt anger rise in his chest. Thomas is under my protection. He is not to be punished or treated roughly. Mr. Jenkins gave Samuel a strange look but said nothing more. Samuel realized he would have to be more careful. If his own overseer was suspicious, other people probably were too. Samuel's greatest fear was that his nephew James would visit and discover the truth. James came to the plantation twice a year to check on his expected inheritance. So far, Samuel had been lucky. James's visits had been brief, and he had not paid attention to the slave children, but Samuel's luck ran out in the spring of Thomas's second year. Samuel was in his study reading when he heard horses coming up the drive. He looked out the window and saw a familiar carriage. James Morrison had arrived unexpectedly from Charleston. Samuel's heart started racing. Thomas was playing in the garden behind Miriam's cabin. If James saw the boy, he would immediately notice the family resemblance. Samuel rushed outside to greet his nephew. James was a tall, thin man with pale skin and cold eyes. He had never liked visiting the plantation, preferring the social life of Charleston to the quiet countryside. Uncle Samuel, James said as he stepped down from his carriage. I hope you do not mind my unexpected visit. I was traveling through Virginia on business and thought I would stop by. Of course not, Samuel replied, trying to keep his voice calm. You are always welcome here. The plantation looks prosperous as always. The tobacco crop seems to be doing well this year. Yes, we have been blessed with good weather. James looked around the property with the eyes of a future owner. Samuel could see him mentally calculating the value of the fields and buildings. I notice you have made some improvements, James said. That cabin near the house looks new. Samuel's stomach clenched. I had it fixed up for my housekeeper. She is a freed slave who helps manage the domestic affairs. A freed slave? How unusual. Most plantation owners do not bother freeing their workers. Miriam has served my family faithfully for many years. She earned her freedom. James raised an eyebrow. Miriam? That is a biblical name. Is she a religious woman? Quite religious, yes. I would like to meet her. It is always interesting to see how freed slaves conduct themselves. Samuel felt panic rising in his throat. He could not let James meet Miriam, not with Thomas nearby. She is visiting her family in the slave quarters today, Samuel lied. Perhaps another time. But as they walked toward the house, Samuel's worst nightmare came true. Thomas came running around the corner of the cabin, chasing a small dog. The little boy was laughing and calling out in his high, clear voice. James stopped walking and stared at the child. Samuel watched his nephew's face change from casual interest to shock to suspicion. Who is that boy? James asked slowly. One of the slave children, Samuel replied. But his voice sounded strange even to himself. James kept staring at Thomas. The little boy had stopped playing and was looking back at the two men with curious green eyes. He looks remarkably like... James began, then stopped. Like what? Like you, Uncle Samuel. Like our family. Samuel forced himself to laugh. All children look similar at that age. You are imagining things. But James was not fooled. He walked closer to Thomas, studying the boy's face carefully. Thomas stood his ground, unafraid, but watchful. What is your name, boy? James asked. Thomas, the child replied clearly. Thomas, what? Thomas looked confused. He had been taught to call himself Thomas Morrison, but Miriam had warned him never to say his full name in front of strangers. Just Thomas, the boy said finally. James turned back to Samuel with fire in his eyes. We need to talk, Uncle, privately. Samuel knew there was no escape now. He sent Thomas away and led James into his study. James closed the door firmly behind them. That boy is your son, James said without any introduction. Do not be ridiculous. Do not lie to me, Uncle. I have eyes. He has the Morrison jaw and the Morrison eyes. He even stands like you did at that age. Samuel sank into his chair. James, I can explain. Explain? What is there to explain? You have been bedding one of your slave women and she gave you a bastard child. It is not like that. Then what is it like? Tell me the truth. Samuel looked at his nephew's angry face and realized that lying would only make things worse. James was not stupid and he had already seen too much. Yes, Samuel said quietly. Thomas is my son. James exploded with rage. How could you do this? How could you disgrace our family name this way? I needed an heir. An heir? That boy is a slave. He cannot inherit anything. He is not a slave. I freed his mother before he was born, and I plan to acknowledge him as my legitimate son. James stared at Samuel like he had gone insane. You cannot be serious. Virginia law does not recognize marriages between white men and Negro women. Any children from such unions are considered illegitimate. I have lawyers working on the legal issues. Legal issues? Uncle, this is not just about law. This is about decency and morality. What will people think when they learn that Samuel Morrison has been living with a slave woman like she was his wife? Samuel stood up and faced his nephew. I do not care what people think. Thomas is my son and he will inherit this plantation. Over my dead body, James snarled. I am your closest male relative. This plantation should come to me when you die, not to some slave brat. That slave brat is the only grandchild my father will ever have. He carries the Morrison blood. He carries slave blood too. That makes him unfit to own white men's property. Samuel felt his temper flare. Thomas is a fine boy with a good mind and a kind heart. He will make a better master than you ever could. We will see about that, James said coldly. I will not let you throw away everything our family has built for the sake of your perverted relationship with a Negro woman. What do you mean? I mean I will fight this in court. I will challenge any will that leaves property to that boy. I will make sure everyone in Virginia knows what you have done here. Samuel felt ice forming in his stomach. James had the power to destroy everything Samuel had worked for. He had money and connections in Charleston. He could hire the best lawyers and turn public opinion against Samuel and Thomas. James, please, be reasonable. Thomas is an innocent child. That child should never have been born, and when I am finished, he will wish he had not been. James stormed out of the study, leaving Samuel alone with his fears. The secret was out now. The battle for Thomas's future was about to begin. Samuel walked to the window and saw James talking angrily to his carriage driver. Soon his nephew would leave for Charleston, but Samuel knew this was not the end. James would be back with lawyers and legal papers and plans to take everything away from Thomas. Samuel had to prepare for war. The stakes could not be higher: the future of his son and the survival of everything he held dear. James Morrison left the plantation in a fury, but he returned 3 weeks later with 2 lawyers and a sheriff. Samuel watched from his study window as the men climbed down from their carriages, their faces grim and determined. Samuel had spent those 3 weeks preparing for this moment. He had met with his own lawyers in Richmond and gathered all the legal papers that proved Miriam's freedom and Thomas's legitimacy. He had also hired armed guards to protect his family, fearing that James might try to kidnap Thomas or harm Miriam. "Uncle Samuel," James called as he marched up to the front door. "I have come to settle this matter once and for all." Samuel met them on the front porch. Besides James, there was an older lawyer named Mr. Crawford from Charleston and a younger man named Mr. Phillips. The sheriff, a heavy man with a thick beard, looked uncomfortable to be there. "Gentlemen," Samuel said calmly, "to what do I owe this visit?" Mr. Crawford stepped forward. He was a well-dressed man with silver hair and cold eyes. "Mr. Morrison, I represent your nephew James in a legal matter concerning your will and the inheritance of this plantation." "I see. And what is your concern?" "We have reason to believe that you have been mentally compromised and are making decisions that are not in your best interest or the interest of your family." Samuel felt anger boiling in his chest, but he kept his voice steady. "I'm of sound mind, sir. I make my own decisions about my property, including the decision to live in sin with a Negro woman and claim her bastard child as your heir. Miriam is a free woman, and Thomas is my legitimate son." Mr. Crawford pulled out a thick folder of papers. "We are here to challenge your will and any documents that attempt to leave property to this woman and her child. Virginia law is very clear about such matters. My lawyers have assured me that my arrangements are legal." "Your lawyers are wrong," Mr. Phillips said. "Virginia does not recognize marriages between white men and Negro women. Any children from such unions cannot inherit property from their white fathers." Samuel looked at the sheriff. "Am I being arrested for something?" The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "Not arrested, sir, but these gentlemen have asked me to witness their service of legal papers." Mr. Crawford handed Samuel a thick stack of documents. "You are being served with a challenge to your will and a petition to have you declared mentally incompetent. We are also requesting that the state take custody of the Negro child for his own protection." Samuel's blood ran cold. "Take custody of Thomas? On what grounds?" "On the grounds that he is being raised in an immoral environment that is harmful to his development," James said. "A young child should not be exposed to the perverted relationship between you and that woman. Thomas is my son. You have no right to take him away from me." "We have every right," Mr. Crawford said. "The boy is technically still a slave according to Virginia law. His mother's freedom papers are questionable, and even if they are valid, children follow the status of their mothers. Since she was a slave when he was born, he is a slave." Samuel felt the world spinning around him. "That is not true. I freed Miriam before Thomas was born." "The timing is suspicious," Mr. Phillips said. "And even if the papers are valid, you cannot simply give a slave woman land and property. Such transfers must be approved by the state." Samuel realized how much trouble he was in. His lawyers in Richmond had assured him that his arrangements were legal, but these men seemed to know Virginia law very well. "I want to see my lawyers before I sign anything," Samuel said. "Of course," Mr. Crawford replied. "But in the meantime, We are placing this plantation under legal supervision to protect its assets. What does that mean? It means that James Morrison is now the temporary administrator of this property until the courts decide who the rightful heir should be. Samuel stared at his nephew in shock. You cannot do this. I already have, James said with a cold smile. I have been appointed by the court to protect this plantation from your poor judgment. The sheriff handed Samuel another set of papers. This gives Mr. James Morrison authority to manage the plantation until the legal matters are resolved. Samuel felt like he was drowning. In one morning, he had lost control of everything he owned. What about Miriam and Thomas? What happens to them? The woman can stay in her cabin for now, Mr. Crawford said, but the boy will need to be relocated. Relocated where? To a proper Christian household where he can be raised according to his station in life. Samuel understood what this meant. They wanted to take Thomas away and raise him as a slave. They wanted to destroy everything Samuel had worked for. I will fight this, Samuel said. I will take this to the highest court in Virginia if necessary. You are free to try, Mr. Crawford replied. But I should warn you that public opinion is not on your side. When people learn about your relationship with this Negro woman, they will be disgusted. No jury will side with you. Over the next few months, the legal battle consumed Samuel's life. He hired the best lawyers he could find and spent enormous amounts of money fighting James's challenge. The case became famous throughout Virginia, as newspapers wrote stories about the white plantation owner who had fallen in love with his slave. The trial was held in Richmond before a judge and jury of 12 white men. Samuel's lawyers argued that he was sane and competent, that Miriam was legally free, and that Thomas had the right to inherit his father's property. James's lawyers painted Samuel as a man who had lost his mind to lust and was trying to destroy white society by giving land and power to inferior people. They brought in doctors who said that any white man who would live with a Negro woman must be mentally ill. The trial lasted for weeks. Dozens of witnesses testified about Samuel's relationship with Miriam and his treatment of Thomas. Some of the slaves from the plantation were forced to testify about what they had seen. Samuel had to sit in the courtroom and listen to people call him crazy and immoral. He had to hear lawyers describe Miriam as a seductress who had used her feminine wiles to steal his property. Worst of all, he had to watch as Thomas was brought into court and examined like a piece of evidence. The little boy was frightened by all the strange men in black robes. He cried for his mother and father, but the judge would not let Samuel comfort him. Thomas had to stand in front of the jury while lawyers pointed out his mixed features and argued about what his race meant for his legal status. Miriam also had to testify. She answered the lawyers' questions with dignity and grace, but Samuel could see how much the experience hurt her. She was treated like a criminal instead of a free woman who had done nothing wrong. Did you seduce Mr. Morrison? James's lawyer asked her. No, sir. Mr. Morrison made me an offer and I accepted it. What kind of offer? He offered me freedom and land in exchange for bearing him a child. So you admit that you sold your body for money and property? I admit that I made an agreement that benefited both of us. Do you think it is proper for a Negro woman to live as the wife of a white man? I think it is proper for two people who care about each other to make a life together. The lawyer sneered at her answer. And do you think your bastard child should inherit a white man's plantation? Miriam's eyes flashed with anger. My son is not a bastard. His father acknowledges him and loves him, but he cannot legally be his father's heir because of his Negro blood, can he? That is for the court to decide. Samuel was proud of how bravely Miriam testified, but he could see that the jury was not sympathetic to her. They looked at her with disgust and suspicion, as if she was something unnatural and dangerous. Samuel's own testimony was equally difficult. He had to explain his decision to make an arrangement with Miriam and defend his love for Thomas. Do you believe your relationship with this woman was moral? The prosecutor asked. I believe it was necessary, Samuel replied. I needed an heir, and she needed freedom. We helped each other. But surely you understand that such relationships violate the natural order of society. I understand that society has rules, but I also understand that love and family are more important than rules. Love? Do you claim to love this Negro woman? Samuel looked across the courtroom at Miriam, who was watching him with hopeful eyes. Yes, I love her, and I love our son. The prosecutor shook his head in disgust. Mr. Morrison, do you realize that your perverted relationship has scandalized the entire state of Virginia? I realize that some people do not understand what we have built together. What you have built is an abomination that threatens the very foundation of civilized society. The trial went on for 6 weeks. When it was finally over, the judge took 3 days to make his decision. Samuel waited in agony, knowing that the future of his family depended on the words of one man. When the verdict came, it was a compromise that satisfied no one. The judge ruled that Samuel was mentally competent and that Miriam was legally free. However, he also ruled that Thomas could not inherit the entire plantation because Virginia law did not recognize the rights of mixed-race children. Instead, the judge divided the property 3 ways. James would inherit 2/3 of the plantation. Thomas would receive 1/3 when he turned 21. Miriam would keep her cabin and 100 acres as originally promised. Samuel was devastated by the decision. He had hoped that Thomas would inherit everything, but at least his son would get something. The appeals court in Richmond upheld most of the original decision, but with important changes. Thomas would still inherit 1/3 of the plantation, but only if he could prove his white parentage when he turned 21. The court also ruled that he could not claim the Morrison name legally until that time. Samuel realized that staying in Virginia would be dangerous for his family. The trial had made them famous throughout the South, and not in a good way. People knew their faces and their story. Some had even threatened violence against Miriam and Thomas. "We cannot stay here," Samuel told Miriam one evening as they sat in her cabin. Thomas was sleeping in his small bed, unaware of the adult troubles swirling around him. "Where would we go?" Miriam asked. "North, to Pennsylvania or Ohio. Places where mixed marriages are more accepted." "But what about the plantation? What about Thomas's inheritance?" Samuel had thought about this carefully. "I will sell my portion of the plantation to James. The money will be enough to buy land in the north and support us until Thomas comes of age. And then? Then Thomas can return to Virginia and claim what is rightfully his. But by then, he will be a man who can fight his own battles." Miriam was quiet for a long time. Finally, she nodded. "You are right. Thomas needs to grow up somewhere safe, where he can learn to be proud of who he is." Samuel negotiated with James to sell his remaining interest in the plantation. James was eager to buy out his uncle and gain complete control of the land. The price was lower than Samuel had hoped, but it was enough to start a new life. In the spring of 1858, Samuel, Miriam, and 4-year-old Thomas left Virginia forever. They traveled north in a plain wagon, carrying only their most important possessions. Samuel had to leave behind the graves of his 3 wives and the big house where he had been born. But he was not sad to go. Virginia held too many painful memories of dead babies, failed marriages, and bitter legal battles. Pennsylvania offered hope for a fresh start. They settled in a small farming community outside Philadelphia. Samuel bought 40 acres of good land and a modest farmhouse. It was much smaller than the plantation, but it was theirs alone. No one could challenge their right to live there or question their relationship. Samuel told their new neighbors that Miriam was his wife, and that they had moved from Virginia for business reasons. Some people were suspicious of the mixed-race family, but Pennsylvania law protected their right to live together. More importantly, Thomas could attend school with white children and learn to read and write properly. Samuel spent his remaining years teaching Thomas everything he knew about farming, business, and managing land. He wanted his son to be prepared for the day when he would return to Virginia to claim his inheritance. "Remember, you are a Morrison," Samuel told Thomas as they worked together in their fields. "Your great-grandfather started with nothing and built an empire. You have that same blood in your veins." "But I also have Mama's blood," Thomas replied. He was 12 years old now and beginning to understand the complexities of his identity. Yes, and that makes you stronger, not weaker. Your mother's people survived slavery and built families despite impossible odds. You carry the best of both worlds. Samuel also made sure Thomas understood the legal situation in Virginia. When you turn 21, you will have to go back and prove who you are. James will try to cheat you out of your inheritance. You must be ready to fight him. Thomas listened carefully to these lessons. He was a serious boy who understood that his future would not be easy, but he was also determined to claim what his father had promised him. Samuel lived to see Thomas grow into a strong, intelligent young man. He taught his son to read law books and understand business contracts. He made sure Thomas could speak like an educated gentleman and carry himself with confidence. But Samuel was growing old and sick. The years of stress and heartbreak had taken their toll on his body. In the winter of 1864, when Thomas was 10 years old, Samuel caught pneumonia and never recovered. On his deathbed, Samuel called Thomas and Miriam to his side. "I want you both to promise me something," he whispered. "Anything," Miriam said, holding his hand. "Promise me that Thomas will go back to Virginia when he is old enough. Promise me that he will fight for his inheritance and win." "I promise, Papa," Thomas said solemnly, "and promise me that you will be proud of who you are, no matter what anyone says about your mixed blood." "I promise." Samuel smiled and closed his eyes. He died peacefully that night, knowing that his son would carry on the Morrison legacy. Miriam raised Thomas alone after Samuel's death. She worked as a seamstress and took in laundry to support them. Thomas helped by doing odd jobs around town and working on neighboring farms during harvest time. When Thomas turned 18, he began preparing seriously for his return to Virginia. He studied law books and practiced public speaking. He also saved every penny he could to hire lawyers for the legal battle that awaited him. On his 21st birthday, Thomas Morrison traveled back to Virginia with proof of his identity and legal documents supporting his claim to the plantation. James Morrison was now an old man, but he still controlled 2/3 of the property and was determined not to give up anymore. The second legal battle was shorter, but just as intense as the first. Thomas had to prove that he was Samuel Morrison's son and that he deserved to inherit despite his mixed race. This time, however, public opinion was slightly more favorable. The Civil War had ended slavery, and attitudes about race were slowly beginning to change. Thomas won his case and inherited his portion of the plantation. He sold the land immediately and used the money to buy a larger farm in Pennsylvania. He never returned to Virginia again. Thomas married a free black woman named Sarah and raised 5 children who all received excellent educations. He became a successful farmer and businessman, eventually owning over 500 acres and employing dozens of workers. Thomas never forgot the lessons his father had taught him about pride and determination. He named his oldest son Samuel in honor of his father's memory. He also made sure all his children knew the story of their grandfather's struggle to give them a better life. Years later, when Thomas was an old man himself, people would ask him about his unusual childhood and his famous father. Thomas would always smile and give the same answer. "My father was a man who believed that love was more important than law and that family was more important than what other people thought. He gave up everything he had been taught to believe in order to give me a chance at life. I have tried to live up to his sacrifice every day since." The Morrison plantation in Virginia was eventually sold to strangers. The big house where Samuel had lived and grieved was torn down and replaced with modern buildings. The slave cabins and Miriam's little cottage disappeared as well. But the legacy Samuel had fought so hard to preserve lived on in his descendants. Thomas's children and grandchildren became doctors, teachers, lawyers, and business people. They spread across the country and built successful lives in spite of the prejudice they faced. Some of them were light enough to pass for white, while others clearly showed their African heritage. But all of them carried the memory of Samuel Morrison, the lonely plantation owner who had risked everything for love and family. The story of Samuel, Miriam, and Thomas became a legend passed down through generations. It was a story about the power of desperate love to overcome impossible obstacles. It was about the courage required to build a family when society said such a family should not exist. Most of all, it was about the hope that one man's willingness to break the rules could create opportunities for future generations to live with dignity and pride. Samuel Morrison never lived to see his great-grandchildren become free and successful Americans. But he would have been proud to know that his desperate bargain with a slave woman had given birth to a dynasty that would last for generations. The lonely, bereaved man who had once offered his land for a son had gotten far more than he had bargained. Or, he had gotten a family, a legacy, and a love story that would be remembered long after his name was forgotten by everyone except those who mattered most, his own descendants.